And coming across the wire on short notice, we have a late notice replacement in Uganda. And yes, I said that, Matt. We have Uganda's very first UFC fighter in David Onama. And Matt, sometimes these weeks we get these prospects that come into the UFC and you kind of pump them up a little bit. And then in the back of your mind, you're going, this guy or this gal, they're not going to have a lot of success in the UFC. They're only brought in on short notice to kind of fail. It's a setup fight. And if you look at the odds for this one, looks like a bit of a setup fight. I'm here to tell you, David Onama is legit as they come. And I absolutely love his style. He is 8-0, a perfect 8-0 as a pro. He's also 10-0 as an amateur fighter. He is on an 18-fight heater going back to about 2014. This guy only became a pro fighter in 2019, and it's like the pandemic never even happened. He fought 3 times in 2019, 3 times in 2020. This is his 3rd fight in 2021, representing Glory MMA and Fitness. And Matt, from David Onama, I have so many notes on him, but I really wanted to give credit where credit's due, and I'm actually going to do this in our other short notice fight as well because, listen, friend of the show, Michael Fidel, that we don't really hear a lot from, he was one of those big proponents with MMA prospects, so I checked him out. MMA-prospects, no free ads, but we're going to do it anyway. There was an interview there that he did with Vince Rodemer back in 2020, and a couple of the takeaways that I got from that I really wanted to mention in this video was the fact that his main training partners then, a year ago, were Sean Woodson, Megan Anderson, and Kevin Kroom. You're going to get the boxing with Woodson. You're going to get the grappling with Kroom. You've got Derek Minner there. You've got all these different fighters. And then on the Instagrams, Zach Cummins and Dakota Bush. Now, Harry Bush, you're going to work in some of that wrestling. The thing that I've seen from David Onama going back and watching through his fights, I might have it there that he's an orthodox fighter. Scratch that out in your memory because this guy can switch. And man, is he special. And from southpaw, I'm telling you, this guy's combinations, like his striking is, I wouldn't say elite level because, again, you've had 10 amateur fights, you've had 10 pro fights. You're still a prospect per se. But I think David Onama is going to go on to do some big things in the UFC at 145 pounds.
And I'm really glad that you mentioned that right at the end, because David Onama really does have that, star-studded talent. What he does really shines on the page, because he has that flashy kind of striking from the outside. He's a two-way striker, too, and I don't just mean that by he can strike orthodox, he can fight southpaw. He can fight moving forwards and going backwards, too. And those are skills that we don't normally see in fighters making their UFC debut. It's just really, really impressive to see. But that's the big issue that I have with this fight. You have David Onama, who is going to be very, very small in this fight. And it's not just that he's going to be small for this weight class. It's also because Mason Jones is about as big as a lightweight can possibly get.
That's it. Height-wise, they're going to be roughly the same. Onama, I think in terms of my numbers there, he's an inch taller. He's actually going to have a little bit in terms of the reach.
How thick is Mason Jones, though?
Mason Jones brings the thickness. Former lightweight and welterweight champ over the Cage Warriors.
And he is built up. And the thing with Mason Jones is we've kind of seen him deal with a striker similar to David Onama. And I don't want to give Alain Patrick that much credit because I feel like
that's when David Onama is putting on the 18th.
Yeah, exactly. David Onama is a much, much, much younger version. He could actually be his son. But the thing that we saw from Mason Jones, at least in the start of that fight, was he could pressure the kicker. He could deal with that movement. And the one thing Jones does really well, and it would be a massive hole in his game if he wasn't able to do this, he's good at cutting off the cage. Even against Mike Davis, he was able to cut off the cage. It's just Mike Davis would respond with power, which normally when you're fighting a guy like Mason Jones is not what I would recommend doing. But Mike Davis is that kind of a puncher and he is that kind of a boxer. So he was able to go in there and go tit for tat with a guy like Mason Jones. If Onama is that confident with his power, and if he's willing to just go in there and try to eat a shot, to trade a shot with Jones, then I'm a little bit concerned about his just overall staying power in this fight. But the real takeaway from this fight, and what I really think we should be focusing on, isn't just how David Onama is going to look against Mason Jones. It is how can we project his inevitable move down to 145? Because let's say he loses a close split decision to Mason Jones. He defends some takedowns, he lights him up on the feet, he moves well. We're talking about David Onama as a possible future real contender at featherweight.
When I look at him, I'm dead serious. When I watch these fights, I go, man, I'm serious. Put this guy on a poster somewhere. I think he's going to be that next star at 145 pounds. this is one of those ones that win, lose, or draw, this is a great opportunity for Onama. Obviously, if he loses, it's at one blemish on his record, but you pick yourself right back up at 145. And when you look at it for Mason Jones, this was supposed to be the rematch against Alain Patrick, a fight that ended in an eye poke where he was absolutely dominating the fight. It hurt everybody's feelings. And then, what was it, after the fact? It was a no contest.
We call that the Czech Congo Ryan Bader, where I come from.
Yeah, it was just a weird fight. But if you look at it for Jones, you're getting ready for a striker. You can draw some parallels. And this is a guy that, yes, has he trained at home in Wales in the past? For sure. But even when he was with Cage Warriors as a very young man, because he's still young right now. Both these guys are very young. But even for Mason Jones in his early 20s to go from Wales to California with Team Alpha Male, which he still trains at and he was training at for this fight anyway, I think those things work well for him in his favor. Now, I said in terms of the odds, they look like a squash match to me because Jones minus 700 favorite. He's a minus 500 right now. Onama open to plus 450. He's a plus 368. I'm dead serious. I know I say some of this sometimes. I'm dead serious. When I look at those odds, I honestly don't see value because when I look at David Onama, and I want to talk about a couple of his fights, if you go back and watch it, the fight against Robe Ison, it was a weird last name. It wasn't Robertson. It wasn't Robeson. Robe Ison, his last fight. That left hook that he throws, it's like, it's cocked and it's long, and then it's natural. Right at the end of it, and drops his opponent, ends up getting the finish there. His fight against Pozzola. Pozzola throws a right kick and then grabs his left knee that planted. It was weird. He fell down, and then Onama just kind of finished. They have it on Topology as a TKO due to a leg injury, but it was just a weird one. He probably hurt a ligament in his knee. And then the fight that I really wanted to focus on, and it was the highlight of that interview that I was reading through and that piece that they had on MMA Prospects, was a fight against Overton. And if you watch that, I believe with FAC, it was Anthony Smith that was on the call for that one, and he's talking about Overton right at the start. This guy's a legit Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He has the grappling, but also the wrestling to go with it. This is going to be the biggest test of David Onama's career. What happened? Well, Overton gets the takedown right off the bat. Onama powers up, gets into his guard. They stand back up. Onama's willing to take Overton down, and then the fight goes back and forth. They both have some successes. Onama's winning the fight. And then at one point in the third round, Overton runs across the cage, goes for a takedown. Onama just kind of grabs him into a guillotine and takes all the momentum, sitting on his butt, and then submits the jiu-jitsu black belt.
It was like Jermaine Duran to me, Juliana Pena.
Like, it was absolutely amazing. So, again, if you look at it for Onama, some of the Topology says, like, lightweight, this and that, featherweight, champion over there. And the last thing I want to say with FAC, your ring announcer yells too much. Like, just stop yelling, talk a little bit more, have some fun. Matt, when we're focusing on this one, I know we've talked a lot about Onama. We talked about the odds. I think Mason Jones is a great fighter. He's going to be around for a long time at lightweight if he decides to move up to welterweight in his career. I think Jones is going to be one of those guys that has a lot of staying power. Obviously, if you lose this fight, you're, 0-2 with a no contest. You don't like to see that. But I do really, really like Mason Jones. His boxing combinations are great. His wrestling is great. His top pressure when he's on the mat is insane. And I had this guy pegged as a very high-level prospect coming in. Although he did lose to Mike Davis, who's a very good fighter, and I wish he fought more than once in a blue moon. But Matt, when I look at this fight, I haven't even talked about Topology votes. I've talked so much. I love this fight. It means a lot to me, just because I'm so excited for these guys' future careers, and I can't wait for them to fight. What's the pick here, and what are you saying?
Is Mason Jones the best fighter ever to get his UFC career started off with a loss in a no contest? I'm sure there's others out there, don't get me wrong. Just skill for skill. You wouldn't think, oh, Mason Jones is now in the UFC. This is how his career would have started. And I understand he definitely would have won that Alain Patrick fight. That was a weird no contest. But still, it has not been a very good start for what was a really hyped up prospect on his way into the UFC. But I do expect him to right the ship. Like we said, he was preparing for an opponent who is much older than Onama, but let's be honest, they do quite a bit of the same stuff with their game, so I do like Mason Jones quite a bit in this fight. The only thing that does worry me about Jones in his overall game is in the third round, his hands drop a lot. Like, I like the boxing combinations, I like the wrestling, but once fatigue starts to play its toll, his hands go from here to here to here, and if David Onama could perhaps land a clean shot in the third round, again, it's going to be tough to do because Jones is such a big, strong guy for this weight class.
Plus 368, if you see value in that, like, I'm not going to be mad. If David Onama goes out there and wins this weekend, don't say that I slept on him, because that's got to be the going narrative. I think he's an awesome fighter, but again, having said that, I agree with you. I have Mason Jones in this fight. I think the key to this one, same as the Alain Patrick fight, but same as, his Cage Warriors fights. We talked about Mason Jones, it seems like, for years now on the channel, but you got to worry about that wrestling. That top pressure is something different than any of the guys that Onama's fought. And then this one being at 155, I'm sure Onama's going to be fit and ready out of Glory MMA and Fitness, but for me, I like Mason Jones in the spot. If you have Onama, ooh boy, you let us know down below in the comments section. If you have Wales' own Dragon Mason Jones, you let us know too. I threw it out there on Twitter. I think the winner and the guy who has the more impressive performance this weekend out of Jonathan Martinez and Mason Jones gets to keep the nickname. The other guy becomes Nighthawk. I can't wait for this fight. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, and as we always say, let's get into it.